Hello, hello. Drew and Brian here from Journey People. We're going to be talking about Lifecycle a bunch. Um, First session is about when and why to invest in Lifecycle. Funny story. We've been chatting about it for 15 minutes already, and Drew forgot to press record. So love it. But you know what that means? That means we're pumped, we're fresh, we're primed, we're ready. Let's hit the ground running. So first thing, um, to when we're talking about when and why to invest in life cycle, we actually got to start with like what does life cycle mean? Like, Drew, what's your short, like, give me the 30-second elevator pitch definition. Pretend I'm a startup founder. I'm like, hey, what's life cycle mean? You've been doing that for a long time, dude. Like, what is that?
Sure. Yeah. So for me, I like to summarize it as managing the customer relationship at scale. And that implies a few things. One is I'm saying customer singular, and I'm talking about at the individual level because everyone has different needs. And so ideally, we're getting very specific on segmentation and personalization, individualization, and all that good stuff. And then also at scale, we talked about this a little bit before I hit record, but there are some life cycle opportunities where the scope is basically indefinite. Um, these products, these services, these retailers, and so on. There's no end point. They hope to retain happy customers and to have affinity for as long as possible, 2, 5, 10 years beyond. Like if I'll give an example. Home Depot customer, they want you to stay a Home Depot customer, not switch to Lowe's, that kind of stuff. And we as marketers and growth people have a responsibility to do what we can to keep that affinity and add value and educate and serve up relevant promos occasionally and that kind of stuff for Home Depot. But then there's some that are finite by default with maybe longer term opportunities. And so like if you are having a baby, there are some content and probably product services that are built around engaging with them at the early stages of being pregnant. And they can provide value and education and so on, all the way through when you have the baby, and then even afterwards in the postpartum period. Possibly the same thing for buying or leasing a car. You need maintenance and all that stuff, and it can be easier in some ways to plan a life cycle around, like touch points around communication with being proactive and giving those heads up. And then I guess that last point I'll double click on, which is there are transactional messages and behavioral and product-based messages, things like password reset and all that kind of stuff. There's more or less like just a running list, a checklist of things that we all kind of have to do from that standpoint. It could be security messages of like a new device login, that kind of stuff. But then there's this huge black box of possibilities for marketing in growth-oriented messaging, where you are testing the waters on how often and what type of content you're sending to your users and what channels, hopefully to improve things like lifetime value and retention and so on. And I think that's where in the last 5 to 10 years, practitioners in our space are starting to get more notoriety, and there's more interest in hiring a life cycle person earlier on, like maybe pre-series A startups, when they have acquisitions starting to have momentum and they need someone to, I'll use a sports metaphor, kind of like hit in those RBIs. Like the acquisition team is getting people on base. They need an expert that's going to improve the results for the scores of again, like things like LTV, conversions, revenue, purchases, and then ultimately retention and engagement.
Love it.
What do you think, Brian?
Well, a couple of things that just stood out to me from what you were chatting about, like I think the piece of like the longer term life cycles, that's super, super interesting. Like one specific example, when I worked at Open Door, we always talked about how people would like buy a home every like 7 years, like the average. So
Mm,
obviously there's people who stay in their home a really long time, there's people who move sooner than that. But like we were like, okay, great, like someone bought or sold with us. How do we think about the life cycle of them being engaged with us for like 7 years, right? It's
mhm,
like that's kind of crazy to even think about, you know? Um, the baby thing actually stood out to me too. A brand that comes to mind is Love Every. I never know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but they do like toys for babies, toddlers, young kids. And so depending on the stage, they would send like toys that are perfect for that level of development and that age. And
mhm,
like to me, that's actually them doing life cycle stuff, right? They understand the life cycle of a young baby, growing into a toddler, and the learning that happens along the way, and then they tailor like their product and also their messaging like to that. So it's really interesting. Like those specific examples came to mind as you were chatting about it. But I love the
mhm,
piece of at scale. I love the personal stuff that you're talking about. Like way
mhm.
cool, way cool. Um,
And oh, sorry, I'll
go
just
ahead, no, go ahead. Riff
what
on that. Yeah, what's up?
one thing that's relevant, I think, regardless of whether it's kind of a built-in life cycle of months or years versus something that is could be for forever. Um, I think one obvious area that we can make an impact in right away is activation rates, which means something different for everybody.
Hmm.
But that's a big spectrum of possibilities for lift or improvement when you invest in a life cycle person. If they come in and you have, like, let's just say the founders and a first marketing hire put together a welcome email, maybe an abandoned cart, and like maybe like a couple other small things on the onboarding session, that
Yeah.
that's a huge blank canvas for improving results. In some cases, a really frequent cadence and very tight segmentation strategies with differentiating tactics depending on the segments or personas or whatever, whether someone activates on day 2 or doesn't activate, or so on and so forth. That's the gift that keeps on giving and one of the biggest areas of leverage. But you can sometimes people assign one full-time hire specifically around activation rate, and there's almost always more opportunity for growth there, and learning, and so on and so forth.
Definitely. That's a kind of a natural segue into the way I think about life cycle and how I define it. And I think one thing about it is like there's always more, right? Like
Mhm.
you mentioned activation, a lot of companies will focus on acquisition, and then there's the whole world of like retention, conversion, expansion, all of that. And we'll talk about more about that later. But anyway, let me get back to my definition of life cycle. When I say life cycle, it's actually short for life cycle marketing, but I shorten it to life cycle. And I do that on purpose because like no one in a company or no clients ever like, how's life cycle marketing doing? Or what's life cycle marketing? They just say like, what's life cycle? So when I say life cycle, I mean the automated messages sent throughout the customer journey.
Mhm.
When X happens or does not happen, we send Y. And that's my simplest definition. And then to like expand on it a little more, when I say across the entire customer journey, when I say customer journey, what I specifically mean is stranger to lead to customer to repeat customer to promoter. When you think about marketing, people historically marketing has been about like generating traffic, generating leads, helping people get to customers. But as you and I know as lifecycle people, there's a whole world of repeat customers, turning them into promoters, unlocking referrals, like all
Mhm.
of that stuff like post purchase.
Mhm.
And so that's why life cycle is so important too. Like I've worked with a lot of like one company I've worked with right or working with right now, we're thinking about getting people to their first purchase. Like all of our thinking has been around that. Or e-commerce companies I've worked with, they are laser focused on that initial acquisition. But when that hits like a ceiling or when that hits like blockers because of ad spend getting too high, it's like, what does repeat purchase look like? What
Mhm.
does retention look like? What does expansion look like? So
Mhm.
anyway,
Mhm.
to bring it back, life cycle is an automated message sent throughout the customer journey. Customer journey is stranger to lead a customer, repeat customer, promoter. There's always tons of opportunity across that. for each single stage, and it's going to look different for every single business. But when someone's like, hey, what is life cycle, that's what I mean specifically.
Yeah, and I like that. It's tight. I would say one caveat is it could also include not automated messaging as well, right? Programs and campaigns, but we're getting closer and closer to a place where it's almost fully automated, and now machine learning is taking off and all this other stuff. One other quick example, if we have any founders or earlier stage companies watching this and thinking about investing in Lifecycle, and having that dedicated resource, or let's just say it's even an agency or a consultant, part-time person at first, is so crucial, because a lot of times in startup and fast-moving company life, could be a mature company, there are these little insights that are out there. Other teams are discovering them, like customer support. There could be like a 2 or 3 categories of topics that they're fielding questions from customers or prospects that dominate the percentage of time they're spending. And I'll give an example. Sometimes it could be, hey, why don't you have X feature? Or, how do I do XYZ? And if there's, let's say 30% of your complaints are around one thing, sometimes you have that feature, or your product, what your company offers that thing, they just don't realize it yet because your UX is clunky or confusing, or you have too many features, or there's a certain browser you have to use, or whatever it is. So as lifecycle people, we can take these constant insights. It could also be an uninstall survey, people giving great feedback and like saying, again, what are the main reasons why people churn from a paid user or whatever. We can take that stuff, and then we can use that in our onboarding touch points or certain periods where it makes sense. I'll give an example. Back in like 2016, 2017, I think one of the main reasons people would uninstall Grammarly's browser extension was because it wasn't compatible with Google Docs. Well, we were working on a Google Doc the compatibility, and it actually wasn't that far away. So how many percentage of the people that churned because of Google Docs could we have kept as Grammarly users if we had maybe had that in a day 2 emails of top 5 misconceptions about Grammarly? And then especially when we launched on Google Docs, people still didn't really, because not everyone's going to see your integrated campaigns, your go-to-market motions. So if we had that as the number one reason of why people are churning, why not start that conversation earlier and directly and get preventative on the churn? And that's just, again, this is one really small example, but you need someone where this is their dedicated role, constantly looking for those insights and then taking action on those insights in places of the life cycle that are going to be highest leverage and drive improvements in churn reduction, LTV, retention, and so on. Sorry, that was long-winded, but I think I eventually got there.
Yeah, I mean, even just piggybacking on that, it's like, I will say, I think that's a different skill set than sending email marketing campaigns.
Yep.
And so I'm with you that lifecycle automations, email automations, but obviously we know lifecycle is it's multi-channel, right? It's email, it's SMS, it's direct mail, it's all that stuff. But for sake of simplicity, let's just say there's automations and there's campaigns.
Yep.
We want automations and campaigns to play nicely together. But historically, most email marketers or most people who do lifecycle got started out as email marketers sending campaigns in things like MailChimp, sending like a weekly newsletter, a monthly newsletter. And then you kind of realize that is like that's one skill set. But lifecycle, specifically like what Drew just mentioned, Drew, of that piece of like, hey, there's this thing that people have a misconception about. Let's put that into an automated flow that's triggered when people start X, and then they're going through this journey, and we want to notify them about this thing automatically, so that it's like it's kind of like preventative, it's proactive, it's different than just like a batch and blast campaign to everybody, right? So I think life cycle and what you're talking about is like it's a different skill set. It's a different skill set. I think it's even a progression of like there's even marketers who learn how to do life cycle over time, and then they can reach that beautiful thing of like the automations playing nicely with the campaigns, creating like this beautiful cohesive experience for people.
Yep. Well said. And then I'll just add one more little bit about the why, and then I have a thought on segueing into the when. There are many other areas where lifecycle people can add value. And yes, ideally, a lot of it is directly around growth, like improving direct revenue, improving retention and engagement, and churn prevention and stuff like that. But there are other areas that are really important. You can leverage, for example, the email channel is really great for experimentation. Same with in-product messaging, and really great for, well, I guess with some variability around like getting feedback, surveys, and so on and so forth. But good for actually testing product ideas that are not yet in the product, like Grammarly Insights. When we started sending statistics to people, it was years before, like 5 years before some of that stuff showed up in the product, just because the roadmap was too dense, and we got to be the proof of concept, and people loved it. If it wasn't an email to our customers, it was a product feature that we were giving things like productivity and top mistakes and so on in your email. Now, the when I wanted to segue into is...
Well, I got a question about that.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
How did that even work? Like, that's cool. That's amazing, right? Like, you're a Grammarly, you're like, hey, we have this insights email. We want to test this new thing, and it's going to be an email first test. How does that even happen? And then why does that happen in email first versus like in the product? And then can you talk more about how that went from like email to products? I think that's super cool.
Yeah. So back in 2014, I started working at Grammarly, and
OG.
Wow. Yeah. I was one of the early marketing hires and brought in to build out to build out the email channel first and foremost, but then that evolved. It was kind of a blank canvas, but right off the bat, I was feeling really strongly that Grammarly could do kind of the quantifiable self, similar to Fitbit, where you're helping people understand just how much for Grammarly's purposes, how much are we using written communication every day to, once you can help people kind of like realize that, they can probably take more ownership around the quality of that communication, because we don't get explicit feedback on our writing once we leave college. We went through the years of getting the red pen and the markups, and you get a grade. But when you're a professional, you don't get a lot of, if any, explicit feedback on your communication. You might have a manager say, hey, those client emails are too lengthy or something like that. But it's few and far between. So in order to get people to care more about their communication more, i.e. to retain as Grammarly users longer, whether it's free or paid, really wanted them to understand kind of like areas for improvement, but also just how much we do this on a daily basis. Like you eat, you sleep, you breathe, you walk, you write. This is like
top five.
Core, yeah, it's a core function. It's a core function. Arguably more words per day than steps per day for a lot of people, and all that good stuff. So it was a unique opportunity. It was around value realization of the product, but also just self-reflection was the idea. And the good news was I pitched it in the interview process, and the head of product and one of our co-founders who's on the product side liked the idea, and the head of product was like, hey, we actually want to add these. We already have it on the roadmap to add some of these statistics into the product eventually. But that product for Grammarly, what we were talking about is like kind of like the main Grammarly editor. A lot of people don't use that. That's for more like long form content or ideation. Students use it a lot, professionals if they're working on a project. But most of the use for Grammarly is it's like ubiquitous and passive. It's while you're browsing websites or responding to emails. It's the browser extension that's always there, kind of as your second pair of eyes and checking. So them prioritizing doing some huge UX and backend solution when they had other fish to fry didn't make a lot of sense, especially with how large a percentage of people were using the browser extension and not the long form editor. So that said, we couldn't use the browser extension and some of these other interfaces to provide a lot of statistic feedback. The core was we wanted to give you correction feedback of like, oh, here you have passive voice, or you may have a misspelling or a misplaced comma or whatever. If we also tried to be giving them like coaching on top of that, that was more like trend based, it would just be too convoluted. So email provide this unique opportunity where the real estate could actually be quite large. So we could test a number of features and statistics. There's something nice about the interaction being not interrupting your workflow when you're using the product, and it's more passive and you get to engage with the email when you want to. And they were already tracking a lot of the things I needed for the MVP in the backend and the database. So there wasn't really a lot of like data intelligence work. It was just a data pipeline exercise to get this stuff in Salesforce Marketing Cloud, which was the ESP we used at the time. So it was more of a, sure, if you think you can figure this out, and if we'll build the data pipeline for you and we'll give you a product designer and you can work on the design of the concept together. And we would love to know if people like this stuff because we have it on our roadmap and backlog. So it was a unique opportunity where we got to champion and prove out that concept. And luckily enough, it became very clear from at least a sentiment standpoint that people loved it, and again, see it as a feature. And when we started to look at reviews on like the Google Chrome store for our extension and things like that, not to mention social media, people would share it on a weekly basis. It was one of the number one things people were mentioning that they liked about Grammarly as a whole, not Grammarly's emails, but I love Grammarly so much. I love the weekly reports. That was a review of the whole product, and our email was getting called out as a key feature and showed up more than anything else that was called out. So it was super validating, and we knew we had a hit. And then, yes, eventually, as our user base has grown and grown, it doesn't matter if only, let's just say, I'm just throwing this out there, if only 20% of our users are using the desktop editor, the longer form. I don't even know what it's called these days because I'm not a full-time employee anymore. But let's just say the Grammarly editor. There's enough users using that where it makes sense to integrate some of those statistics and actually create like some consistency between the email experience and the product. You can do that in a number of ways. I'm going off on a real tangent here, but Grammarly Insights was a beast, but it was also, while it was high effort from an email standpoint, it was relatively low effort for the company and high impact. So it was a big win.
Love it. It sounds like the build for email is just easier than the build in product.
So much easier. And then the viewership was much higher because I'm hitting everybody, regardless of whether they use that editor or they use the browser extensions or the Microsoft Word add-in or whatever. You target everybody.
Let's just talk about how fun making emails like that is. Like, I still think it's just so cool that you made that thing, dude. Like, just straight up. I admired it before we even met. And like, I think what's cool about it is like, you came up with that. Like, you came up with that idea from the ground up, concepted it, obviously did it in collaboration with the team. But like, it's so cool, and millions and millions and millions of people have gotten it. So I just think that's way cool. And then all of the dynamic and personal stuff, as someone who's been doing life cycle for a long time, like that's the most fun stuff, like to me personally. And I know you and I have chatted about this before, but I think it's because you know what the email channel is capable of.
Mhm.
You know what the email channel is capable of. It's like, how can we push it, right? How can we push it? What can we make dynamic? What can we make personal? And it's not that, like, at the end of the day, I don't like just doing like life cycle marketing kind of emails that are like value props and stuff. That stuff is great and necessary and essential. Man, the dynamic stuff is super fun. Super fun.
So fun, so fun, and it can have a high ceiling, but it's got to be very intentional, and you got to read the room on the real opportunities, and don't just send a weekly digest because Grammarly did it. It's got to every sandbox. The conditions are a little different, and the solution should be very contextual to that.
For sure. So like, I look at that Grammarly Insights email as it's still an investment, right? It's an investment in life cycle. It's an investment in something that's on a regular basis. I know we've been like chatting about this, but just like simple, straightforward question for you and for me is like, why invest in life cycle?
Yeah, so we're giving some of those little snippets of clues, like we've hinted at, improved revenue, which, by the way, didn't say it explicitly. Those RBIs, the more revenue driven, the improvements in revenue mean more money to invest back into acquisition. So it's this really important lever for increasing your spend efficiency and overall possibly profitability if you're chasing that. So obviously the more users you get, the more growth you're getting, the more 5% improvement in revenue, or 5% improvement in paid user retention. That stuff is critical for the health of your company, and eventually becomes so much money if you're successful that trickles its way into not just acquisition spend, it trickles its way into overall marketing budget or hires in expanding of the team and so on. So you can make more and more investments in more and more places. But again, I go to the earlier stage startups of, you might have let's say you have a 6-month runway. There's a little bit of a chicken and the egg of, do I pay to bring in, like a lot of times they'll bring in one marketer at first, and they're kind of like a generalist. And they'll decide how to invest in acquisition and scale certain paid channels and all of that, and do CRO or homepage and funnel optimization. But eventually, the next thing is usually, we need some emails, or we need a lifecycle person, or we at least need a strategy, and we need to figure out then the cheapest way to invest in the 1.0, which is that's a whole other conversation. But that's usually is like, how do we bring in an expert, maybe like a Drew or a Brian, that can tell us what to do, so we can just gut check what they would do if they were us. But then they need someone to actually execute on that. And so the why invest in Lifecycle is to improve your baseline results overall as a company, not to, at that stage, to improve your brand perception. It is actually a performance and health decision, and it can help level up your traction, so that it's kind of like the rising tide raises all the boats. Like, you need acquisition working really well, and then you need that initial foundation that's scalable for Lifecycle, and then a lot of other things can come downstream once you get those elements in place.
Love that. Yeah, my like one-liner when people are like, hey, why should I invest in Lifecycle, is move your conversion, retention, and expansion metrics.
Yep.
The flip side of it, the other way I like to think about it too, is like, kind of like, what if you don't invest in Lifecycle, right? And like, put another way, it's like, what if someone subscribes to your stuff via email, like your newsletter, blog, whatever, or they fill out a contact form and you don't send anything? You don't send a welcome series, you don't send a lead follow-up thing, you don't send anything. Let's say someone signs up for a trial of your product and that's it. They're just left to come back themselves. They're left to figure it out. What if someone becomes a customer? Let's just say you're an e-commerce business, and this is so ludicrous, it would never happen, right? Like, let's say you're an e-commerce business and someone orders your stuff and you don't send an order confirmation email. You don't send delivered or shipping on the way emails. You don't send anything. And I think it just sounds ludicrous to think of these things. It's like, okay, don't make a welcome series. Don't make an onboarding series. Don't make an upsell series. Don't make cross-sell. Don't make confirmation. If you don't do that, that's bad, right? Like, how are people going to get to the next step? And there's some people who are going to be, they're going to be proactive. They're going to be high achievers. They're going to be those great customers who you love, who just like, they do everything you want them to without any reminders or nudges. But the reality is, like, most of your customers are sitting on their freaking couch, not thinking about you, thinking about the million things going on in their life, all the stuff they got to do that day. And like, they just need a little nudge. They need a little nudge. They need something to teach them how to use your product. They need something to like remind them that there are things coming in the mail. And they need something of like how to use this thing in the product. Like, there's just all these different pieces that the reality is, like, people need reminders, they need guidance, they need nudges, they need the next step, they need things clearly communicated to them. So it's we want to move conversion and retention and expansion metrics. That's like a simple reality of why invest in Lifecycle. And the other piece of it too is just like, think if you didn't send any of this stuff. And it's like, if you do send this stuff, it's like, how can you make it even better? Especially as like, I don't know, we'll talk about like when to invest in Lifecycle, right? There's times where it makes sense to really go all in on like testing all the different stages and all of that too. But the one liner is like, move conversion, retention, expansion metrics, and then just think how weird it would be, like, if you didn't build any of this stuff, for Lifecycle.
100%. And like what you're getting at is opportunity cost. And this is like one of the big themes is Lifecycle wants you, and getting into the automated stuff. So regardless of whether you bring in a full-time hire or whatever, you need that 0 to 1 motion. You need that foundation, because the opportunity cost of you not having that is huge, because these things, as long as it's done with competency, will pay dividends. Will pay dividends forever. And then, you have that foundation that you can improve upon. Super, super critical. And similarly, I implied it earlier of like people, maybe like, they don't want to pay for a veteran at first because they've got that short runway, but there's that element of the more experienced someone is that you bring in, the better quality of that MVP, the more dividends you're going to get. And also probably the faster you'll get the thing implemented in the first place. So do you want to pay a newbie 3 months to do a lot of hand holding and back and forth and revisions, and then maybe successfully get things automated? And when I say newbie, I mean like, hiring someone with like less than 2 years of experience that they may not have a broad enough set of skills to do things efficiently. So you got to factor that in as well. But yeah, the opportunity cost is huge, because when we're talking about automating a bunch of stuff, as long as they are not done haphazardly, they should improve your overall results. You can obviously measure that, and you absolutely need to do that for incrementality and all that good stuff. But it's kind of like if money was not an object, this would be a no-brainer that it's one of the very first things you need to do once you have some acquisition traction. The complication just comes with how much runway and money and what connections people have. And like, I will say what usually where things go awry is, let's just do it ourselves. We'll have our one growth person who's never done email before do some research and implement this and work with a founder. And then next thing you know, 6 months down the line, they realize they have a deliverability problem, and they bring in someone for just like a couple calls, And we notice right away, hey, you're on a terrible platform that you've implemented incorrectly. Your deliverability is, your reputation is already hurt. And those things are, as you know, incredibly costly, and they take a long time to kind of dig yourself out of that hole. So that's the cautionary tale that I would bring up is the more experienced the people are you work with from the get-go, contract or full-time, the less risk, and you avoid nightmare scenarios because they give you a lot more leverage. Anything I missed there?
I think I think the only thing I would add is people think like email marketing life cycle is easier than it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason is it's really interesting because there's like sometimes product people will touch email things, founders will touch email stuff, like other marketers have some experience with email channel. Everyone's kind of like touched it. So they're like, oh, I know how to do it.
Yep.
Or they've heard like best practices, like
Mm-hmm.
from established companies saying like, oh, this is how you should do subject lines, or this is how other companies
Right. Right.
do X, Y, and Z. But like number one, so I think there's this weird thing where just everyone thinks they know how to do life cycle, even if they like don't. And then the flip side, as a life cycle person, you and I both know it's actually really hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's work. It's work. Like it's a full-time job, a full-time role in so many different companies. So like
Yeah.
people think it's easy, but it's actually hard. And then the nuances around that, how leaders or how stakeholders think about life cycle affects how they end up investing in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the reality is like people just get what they pay for, and then they can learn the hard way. If they underinvest or if they overinvest too early, like that's another thing too. So like anyway, all I would say is that um all of that is real and people get what they pay for,
Yep.
on both sides, on both sides.
Yep.
One interesting thing is you've already touched on it. I mean, let's just talk about when, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
when to invest in life cycle. Because I do personally think that there's times to invest in life cycle and times to not
Mm-hmm.
invest in life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious your take on that. Like
Yeah.
when not to.
I think we got to talk about volume and things like product market fit and like the stage of the company. But
Yeah.
let's say you're a founder, you have a small team, and so far it's like been a very manual, maybe almost like sales driven effort to get customers, or you've stood up some things on some paid, you have like a Facebook or Google paid presence that's starting to like show some traction or whatever. Um, you're probably too early unless you have incredibly deep pockets and you're going to continue to invest in, like, let's say you just have like VC money or whatever that is like, or like a parent company and you're a startup within a parent company and you have like a 2 or 3 year runway or something along those lines. In that case, it might make sense to, even if like, let's say you're only getting a few thousand leads per month or something along those lines, it might make sense to go ahead and invest in some foundation of a life cycle. But if you're like bootstrapping 3 to 6 months runway at max, and it's like you're sweating just investing like $5,000 a month in paid acquisition or something along those lines, and it's like a little unclear whether it's ROI positive for you right now if you're in those early unstable areas and you're redoing the homepage every week or whatever, something along those lines. That might be too much chaos and too much risk for you to bring in a lifecycle person. Whereas, you have some consistency of baseline results, you have kind of like a clear conversion rate on the funnel and all of that stuff. I think that's stability. There's no like, I don't have a precise benchmark, but reaching a point of predictability and stability on the acquisition side, that to me is where you can start at least thinking about this.
Yeah, I think the thing I would add there is like when the product market fit is there, but I have like nuances to that. I have like a couple of frameworks around that. Like the first one is I think of life cycle as the sooner or later investment. So
Mm-hmm.
like if you think about it, like how we were talking about earlier, like automated messages across the entire customer journey, literally every business in the entire world has a customer journey. Like stranger lead, customer, repeat customer, promoter. Obviously it's
Mm-hmm.
different. There's different stages for each thing,
Mm-hmm.
but literally every business has that stuff. So they're gonna like need to message people at those different stages sooner or later. So it's just a question of like of when, right? And like the other framework before I or when I dig before I dig in the product market fit thing more is I think of life cycle as hospitality and all the acquisition stuff as invitation, right? So like a lot of startups or companies will
I
go out.
love that, by the way. That's awesome. Continue.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So think of it like acquisition. We're going out, we're inviting a bunch of people to
Mm-hmm.
come to our party or to our like super cool website or app. Anyway, inviting a bunch of people to come to our party. And then if we're not hospitable to them, they're going to have a really, really terrible experience. But at the same time, if you invest in the hospitality, you have like your dining, beautiful dining setup. You have like all these decorations. You have like the most beautiful home to welcome people into. But if you didn't invite anyone to the party, like no one's going to come, right? So it's like it's such a it's such like this weird dance because the sooner you invest in life cycle, it's cool. You're going to be able to receive people well. You're going to have the hospitality stuff in place. You're going to be able to receive them. They're going to be taken care of. If you do it too soon and don't invite people to come to your party, it's like too soon, right? If you do it later, it's like you may be like scrambling as people are like coming to your door. So that's why like us talking about this idea of like different guardrails, like product market fit being there. I think with product market fit being there, with that one, it's like yeah, you know that people are using your thing. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
you're confidently inviting people to the party. They're coming. They want to hang out with you. They like you. And then it's like investing in a hospitality piece is just like a no-brainer,
Yep.
right? But it also is a stance. Like I've worked with a lot of companies who like want to invest early just because they want to have that experience where they receive people well. And that's also great.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also worked with companies who they brought me on too early, and even candidly, I've told people before, I'm like, hey, I think it's too early to bring me on, and it's like that's just a weird conversation to have because one, people aren't used to being like, oh, you're telling me not to work with you, and I'm like, yes, I am, because if there's not a clear path to ROI, like this is the other piece too, right? If I work with someone on the lifecycle side and they don't have a ton of volume, i.e., they're not like going and inviting people to come check out their product and stuff, there's not going to be any conversions. There's not going to be anyone to retain. There's not going to be anyone to expand. So like if they invest all this money in working with like me or whoever, it's the ROI is just not going to be there. It's not going to make sense. So
Yep.
it's such this like interesting dance between like sooner or later. Do you
Yes.
have product market fit? Is the volume there? Is the ROI there? And so it's like it's this dance of everyone's going to do it sooner or later, but it's like weighing all of those different pieces
Mm-hmm.
for your business, for your company, for your product, etc.
Yep. Well said. And I would add, as kind of an element of product market fit, would be if people are churning out of your product, let's say it's a software service or a subscription or something like that, if the majority are churning really early and you don't have good retention rates, then you have a really leaky bucket, and there's no lifecycle marketer in the world that can compensate for a product that is just not there yet. So you know what I
So
mean?
good, dude. So good. It's true.
Because and I see this is this I actually turned down an opportunity a month or two ago to help stand up a 1.0, because the more I learned, it just seemed like the product wasn't there yet, and I didn't like the idea of working on some emails in this case that I felt like weren't going to make the difference. That wasn't where the leverage was. The leverage was product development and understanding why 70% of their users were churning after day 30, like something along those lines, or churning after one use. I don't remember the exact details, but it felt too early to me from that standpoint too. So I think this is like part of the product market fit umbrella, but you need that like breakthrough moment where your customers are excited. You have clearly built something that has that market fit. And sure, there's a lot of places you're going to take it in the future. But hopefully you've already got like something that feels like it could create sustainable growth. I think that's just, super critical.
So good. So good. It's like, yeah, that churn stuff, or like if a product is just massively churning, it's not a lifecycle problem, it's a product problem.
Yes.
And it's like, I think of lifecycle as something that can like help with learning, with I even think of it as like throwing gas on a fire. Like if your product is already like just crushing it, like I mean, lifecycle will just improve it even more, get more people in the door, get more people converted, retained, expanded, all the above. But also like a product can be so good. Like I say this like truly, like if a product can be so good, the intent is so high on the customer side, like some people may just be driven and just come back on their own. Like that's the
Yep.
ideal dream scenario. There's just not many products in the world that are that sticky,
Yep.
like very, very, very few. But like that's the kind of thing. If your product is just so good, like you don't even need life cycle, right? Like, and I'll just tell people that too. It's like, but life cycle can be an accelerant in those cases, like as a real talk kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Absolutely.
okay. I want to give people let's give them some like little things to ask, or like kind of some if statements. So like when the product market fit is there, I think what they can say internally is, we're confident we have product market fit, so let's invest in lifecycle to receive people well as we scale.
Mm-hmm.
That is like I mean, we're with companies like they invest in lifecycle because like that's true. That's
Mm-hmm.
true for them. So if that's true for you, that's a damn good reason to invest in lifecycle.
Mm-hmm.
Like if the volume is there. So the way to think about this from a numbers perspective is, if we convert X% more people with an updated, I don't know, put your series in here. It could be welcome, upsell, cross-sell, like whatever. If we convert X more people at that stage, will that have a significant impact on the business?
Mm-hmm.
Or do we focus on acquisition to get more volume? And the caveat there is like, if the volume is not there, but you want to receive people well and like invest in the hospitality piece because you think you're going to get to product market fit soon, then invest in lifecycle.
Mm-hmm.
Last piece, when the ROI is likely to be there, if we invest X in lifecycle, will the conversion gains across the customer journey be worth that and more,
Yeah.
right? So a consultant gives you a quote, an agency gives you a quote, you're thinking about investing in a full-time lifecycle hire or a full-time lifecycle team. And we're going to talk in future sessions about like the investment in each of those things. And we'll give actual like numbers, things that we've seen, things that we've charged potentially. Like, will the conversion gains across the customer journey be worth that and more? So will the ROI likely be there? That's the question to ask
Yep.
for your context. And then, you know what, if you're like Drew, you were saying earlier, like if people have a lot of money in the bank, they really want to pour gasoline on everything, it's like they may invest in that up front if the ROI may not be there initially. That's a valid case too. So again, it goes back to this idea of like sooner or later, but these are like the good questions to ask, and then making the decision based off of these levers. Because investing in life cycle is like, it's no joke. Like it costs money. I mean, it costs money. It's an investment. It's a true investment in
Mm-hmm.
resources, in engineering, in product, especially if you want to do it right and well and really
Mm-hmm.
cool stuff. It's like it's a big investment.
Yep. Agreed. And on that note, there are multiple pieces of that investment. There's the human element, and then there's the tech stack element. So like a little bit of a real real talk for founders and leadership, heads of growth marketing, whatever. It's like, don't want to downplay that it is a significant investment. Let's say let's just say 10,000 a month for the human element. This is a very big ballpark, but that kind of covers like an FTE that could be like early to mid level, or a combination of like some contractors or whatever. Let's just say 10,000 ballpark, but let's also say 5 to 10,000 ballpark. You can definitely go lower on the ESP marketing automation platform. So we're talking 15 to 20 to 25K per month for when you're like really like that line in the sand of ready to invest. So that's why I think the most reasonable first phase of this is usually carving out what is the MVP of a foundation of automations that you should build, and then bringing in someone you trust or a referral of someone that you respect that has worked with someone to build that for you in 2 to 3 months. And the other catch-22 that a lot of people do is they will possibly, I love MailChimp, but like its legacy is small businesses, and it's trying to create a product that scales for high growth companies and whatever. And it comes up short in a few ways there. So like, point just being, a lot of people will find the cheapest ESP in there and that has the most features that they can find and maybe get a few referrals. The problem with that is a lot of times sometimes they do multiple. They'll use one for transactional emails, or one or two for campaigns and automations, and it becomes this Frankenstein of a situation that when you do hire your full-time employee, they have to clean it all up, and it becomes this huge project and pain in the ass. But that where I'm going with this is, be careful. You get what you pay for. Be careful about just finding the cheapest on the tech stack standpoint, because it will end up biting you at some point later on. And again, it goes down to that opportunity cost. So I would say, before you invest in the tech stack, find that trusted person that can help you stand up your 1.0 and get their 2 cents on that side, and try to find a sweet spot. Because that's another area I see people go wrong. Is, we're going to have our head of product or engineering procure, their preferred tech stack for this stuff, but they've never managed it on a day-to-day basis. We're just, it's a technical decision. So no, you need a practitioner's input on that decision. People screw that up all the time. And like I said, it's a big pain in the neck to clean up. So I'll stop there, but just want to acknowledge, yes, it is a big investment. Take a phased approach if you need to. One other option is hire a part-time person that you think could be the full-time person, and you're both testing the waters and feel each other out for several months. And like, I'm not saying that's easy to find that perfect person in that situation, but it is doable. That's how I started my career at Grammarly. I was a consultant, part-time hours for the first few months before I got hired. So just look for creative solutions.
Two call outs there is, one, stoked we're going to do like a whole session on tool stack and all of that later on. And I think I love your point of like, don't go with the cheapest. The thing I would add is, don't go with the fastest. And it's like, so cheapest is usually accompanied by fastest, because it's like, we've used a system before, or I heard this one. And like, I think what we're not saying is, or I'll just speak for myself. Like, what we're not saying is like a full evaluation that takes months and months and months. I mean, put a week of thought into it.
Yeah.
Talk to a couple of people. It has long-term ramifications on potential future migrations, your engineering work, your data model, how you're able to do triggers, filters, and conditions, the technical side of lifecycle marketing, engineering versus resources you're going to have to dedicate later, systems you're going to have to consolidate, messages you're going to have to migrate. Like, it's just take a week. It's all good. And then to So don't go the fastest. That's my point. And then I think we're kind of nearing the end of this, but like, I don't know, we can tell people how we can help. Do you have any other final things, or do you feel like we covered everything for when and why to invest?
I think the only final thing I will say, and it kind of gets into the how we can help, is this stuff is case by case. It's not
100%.
It's not cookie cutter. How you build a 1.0 for a D2C brand versus SaaS versus a mature retailer or something along those lines. It's all very contextual, case by case, and it just goes back to you said it before. This stuff is a lot more difficult and there's a lot more layers than people oftentimes realize. And that's one of the reasons Journey People exist is on the hiring side, people don't know how to set up lifecycle marketers for success. Oftentimes the JDs are usually kind of generic. They know they want you to improve things like retention and revenue and lifetime value and all of that, but they don't know what that looks like in many cases. So just make sure you bring in people with a lot of experience, at least from an advisory standpoint, as you start this journey. Don't minimize both the technical side and then also the strategic side.
100%. So like anyone listening, if you're thinking about investing in Lifecycle, Drew and or myself can help you navigate that. Mm-hmm. Lots of different pieces to it. Tool side, the human side, the what you actually do on the strategy and execution side for your specific context and company. We're happy to help. So reach out to us, journeypeople.com. It's JRNYPPL.com. Yeah, check it out. Happy to help. Looking forward to doing more sessions. Let's do it.
Yep, perfect. Yeah, and at the core, we can help in those early stages of the vision, the strategy. We can help with the resourcing through our talent network and expanded network. And then we can also help with coaching if you do have those resources and you're in the first year or so of that investment. So yeah, just reach out to us. But also, like Brian said, more topics to come. We've just barely scratched the surface at this point. And Brian, enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise.
Cool. I'm going to end recording.